Noon here is just a little bit about destructuring and spread, which I think you guys have probably already gone through, but maybe it would be useful to have a little bit of a review of it just to kind of see how it works, because we're going to be using it quite a bit. So to do that, let's create a file in here. Oops. Let's go to Dojo, stack, smurn, lectures. All right, and then I'll just create a file called destructuring. Kind of a weird word, huh? A lot of times people think that it's deconstructing, but it's actually destructuring is what it is.
First I read that's destruction.
Destruction. All right, destructuring.js. Cool. So I've got this file. Let's do some stuff inside of it. Let's say we create an object, right? That's pretty typical. So let's just create Francis. Yeah. All right, our standard sort of stuff, right? First, Francis. Last, is it Bothan? Bothan. Like a Batman.
My husband used to be called Batman in the military.
Okay. fb.com. And let's give her, let's say, an array of interests. All right? So things that she likes. What are you interested in, Francis? Yeah, we know about that. That's true. What else? Do you like any sports?
Music.
Music. That's good.
I like art.
Nice. Arts. So, oops. Oh, that's right. Yeah, you are the go-to person for people who don't like front end, right? Okay, cool. All right, so let's say that I want to get some information about Francis. So I have this whole Francis object, right? But I only want, say, one piece of it. I just want her email. How would we typically go about getting her email? Yeah, so we would do something like that, right? Let me get our nodemon running. So stacks. Oh, burn. Okay, so we'll go nodemon destructuring. Okay, so if we want to log out Francis's email, let's just say console.log francis.email. Right, so we're getting that as expected. Let's say that I also want her last name as well. So same thing, right? I could say francis.last, and that would get us what we want. What if I wanted to actually get those two things and just have them available to me as variables without having to do this whole dot notation every time, right? Is that possible? It is now. So we have this thing called destructuring that allows us to essentially reach inside of an object and grab exactly the things that we want from it. It's sort of like, think about this dot notation as if we would have to take a, let's say we had a bunch of coins inside of a cup or something like that, right? And I wanted to get out some specific coins. Well, probably if I couldn't see inside that cup, I'd have to just pour it all out, right? And then just like, okay, where do I need to look, right? But this is sort of like if I had a way, if I could just reach inside that cup and grab exactly the coin that I wanted to, because I know the structure inside that cup. I know where, like, all of my dimes are in one side of it or whatever, so I can go grab a dime over here. That's kind of like how destructuring works. It's such that, well, I already know the structure of this object, so therefore I know exactly where to go to find the properties that I want. So this is how we can do this same thing, but with destructuring. So I'll comment that out here. In fact, let's just get rid of it. So it's going to look a lot like I am actually creating an object here. Okay? So I'm going to say const first, comma, email. And I'm going to set this thing equal to Francis. Okay? You see how it looks like it almost looks like I'm constructing an object here? But notice how I haven't actually set any values for those keys, right? I'm really just saying these are the keys that I'm interested in inside the Francis object. I'm targeting them specifically and saying those are what I want. Okay, so now we can come down here and just log them out because they're just any old variables for us. So I've got first and email. Okay? And I'm getting Francis in her email. So perfect. All right. What if I wanted to, say, destructure this in such a way that I wanted those things to be called something else? I didn't want them to be called first or email. I wanted to change the names.
Colon and then the name of the variable you want.
Correct, yeah. So we can alias these ones by using a colon and then specifying the new name that we want to apply. Okay? So if I wanted that to be, I'll just change it to not first. Okay? And then this will be not email. Now if I log these, of course, these don't exist anymore, right? So first and email are gone. The only thing that exists, or the only things besides Francis are not first and not email, because I've specifically aliased these two things. Not first, not email. Okay? So that gives you some control when you're doing your destructuring. Maybe you don't want to use the exact same keys that were inside the object. You want to change that a little bit. Okay. What if I'm not sure that a particular key exists inside of an object? Can I handle that in some way, do you think? So let's say we're looking for another key, like we're looking for hair color. It doesn't happen to be inside this particular object. What I can do is I can say here inside my destructuring, hair color, and then I can say equals some default. Okay, so by default, if we don't have a hair color inside there, this should print out black, right? And we get black. If, on the other hand, I do give her a hair color, so let's just pretend for a second that she's blonde, we should get blonde printed instead, right? So in this case, I am able to reach into this object and grab hair color because it actually is there. If it's not there, then that default value that I put in would apply. Okay? Any questions so far?
Is that only because it's reading from top to bottom, or just because when you create a constructor, that takes precedence over the black hair color?
Well, yeah, what takes precedence is that it's going to look inside the actual object to see if that key was inside. In this case, that key is inside, so it's going to give me back the value that was in there for it. Right?
Find the possibility.
What's hard-coded? This is?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, all these things are hard-coded, right? They're not variables or anything like that. Yeah, exactly. But again, if I were to comment this out, it's our default that would now take hold because we no longer have that key inside the object, right?
And then when you set
So it
the
goes
hair
back to
color
black.
In the instance where hair color does not exist in Francis, then it doesn't mutate the original object Francis, does it?
No, that's not mutating. So again, just to prove that to ourselves, if we were to write after this console.log Francis out, we wouldn't expect that to change at all, right? It's still the same exact object. Yeah. Okay. So if I wanted to do both of these things for a key, like let's say I wanted to extract something out, rename it, so give it an alias, and also provide a default value, I could do all of those things in one shot, right? So let's say there was some other characteristic that I wanted to get about Francis. choose, not choose. So I'm aliasing that, right? And then we'll say equals Nike. Okay, so now let's just log that out as well. Not choose. So where are we here? Oh, black Nike. Yeah, it's right there. It's just kind of hard to see, right? Okay, so we did both in one shot. We aliased it, so we decided we don't want to use the key name that was in there, and we want to provide a default value just in case it's not inside the object. Okay. All right. So that's a little bit about destructuring inside objects. We can also do a little bit of that inside arrays as well. Okay, so we've got this little interests array right here inside the Frances object, right? And let's say that I wanted to grab her first two interests, so dogs and music. How would we go about doing that if we were not destructuring? Yeah, so it would be something like this. We'd say console log Frances dot interests. Oops. And then if I wanted the first one, I would put at the 0 index, right? And then I'd say Frances dot interests at the 1 index, like that. And that should give me what we're expecting. So if I look up here, dogs and music, right? Okay, cool. So let's try this. Let's try to destructure that a little bit. So we'll say const, I'll create this object here. We'll say interests, and then inside this interests, let's create some variable names for her first and second interest. So we'll say first interest, second interest. And then we'll set this equal to Frances. Okay? So let's see if we get that. I'm going to comment out this other stuff so that we don't have a lot of stuff going on. There we go. Console.log first interest, second interest. Okay, and sure enough, we get dogs and music, right? Okay. So that's how we can use this same type of principle with arrays, which is that it's sort of like in the same way that we're creating them, we can also sort of break them apart. We're breaking them up into separate elements and sort of naming those elements whatever we want to call them. Okay. Any questions about that with arrays? Okay, cool. So if we're all good on destructuring, I also want to talk a little bit about this concept called spread. So the way that spread works is the idea behind it is sort of, let's do some stuff with some keys or elements inside of an array, and then we'll be able to create a new object or an array with everything that's left over. Okay? So right now, I'm only pulling out Frances's first and second interests, but what if I wanted to create a new array with all of the other interests that are inside here, like art, design, and CSS, right? I could say comma, dot, 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 and then we'll just call this something like all other interests. Okay? So instead of logging first and second interests, let's change that and let's just log out all other interests and see what that looks like. Okay, so it's giving us this new array that has those three things in it, right? Everything past the first two interests. Any questions about that? Does it look kind of funky to you guys?
Yeah.
Indeed, right? Yeah, it's one of those things, like the first few times you see it, you know, you might have to scratch your head and go like, I don't really get what that's saying. All right. Let's try to apply this same principle to an object as well. So again, we've got this object with the first, last, email, and interest inside of it. So let me comment that guy out there. And instead of extracting all of this stuff, let's simplify a little bit. Let's say const first. So I'm getting her first name, and then I'm saying something like rest. Okay? So what this rest is going to become, and we'll see this when we console log it out, it's going to become a new object that has all of the other properties inside of it except for that first. Okay? So I'll say const first and then rest equals Francis. So we'll just console.log rest. Okay, so see how this new object that we've created by using that little spread operator has all of the properties inside of it except for her first name. Right? Yes, Albert.
The dot dot dot, does that only come at the beginning and the end? Or like if you put it in the middle and then put like last as right after rest, like what happens?
Yeah, you're not, that should throw an error, so let's try that. It's going to say something like you can only use the rest operator or the spread operator at the end. So yeah, if I go like that, see now we're getting an error and it's saying rest element must be last element. Yeah, exactly. Okay, so this is sometimes useful when, say you have a whole object, but there are maybe a couple properties that you're not interested in. You can very easily target them out like this, and then it'll create a brand new object with everything else that's still in there, still intact. Okay, so that's a little bit about how spread works. I also want to show you how we could use destructuring with our functions as well. So let's hop back over to that Create React app that we were working on this morning. So our list component here, it was taking in this thing called props, right? And this was an object. So let's use some destructuring in here to make it a little bit easier to write our code inside of our JSX. All right? So I know this props that I'm getting is an object, and I can actually use destructuring right inside here. So I can destructure the title from it, and I can also destructure items from it. So now rather than me having to say props.title and props.items, well, I can just say title and items. And this is especially useful, you know, if your props had a bunch of different things in it. Now we don't always have to say props dot, right? Keeps it nice and clean. So what we're doing is we're reaching into that props object and grabbing out the specific keys that we're interested in. Okay? Questions about this?
And we need curly braces for that.
Mm-hmm.
Because that is JavaScript.
Yeah, you do. So those curly braces are saying we're destructuring from this argument here. Yes, Baxter.
What was there before? We put title with items.
Yeah, so before it just said props,
Okay.
like this. We were taking in an argument and we called it props. Now every time we want to get some part of that, we have to say props dot, right? Props dot title, props dot items. Okay, so it gets a little bit verbose. This way, if we destructure, we don't have to always say props dot. Now you could also do your destructuring inside the function too if you prefer. So if that's a little too much to look at, having it right there inside the argument, you could also just say const title items equals props, like that, right? And that would accomplish the same thing. And then again, we would be able to get rid of this props dot, like that. Okay? So that's typically where you guys are going to see destructuring is, you know, inside of a component, where we're trying to take different props from that component and make it a little bit cleaner to write our JSX.
Question. So,
Mhm.
so instead, if we want to destructure, so if we want to rename the title or we want to use a spread, so we're gonna put in the parameters. Like
Yeah,
that-
we can
that-
definitely do that. So again, if I wanted to rename title to something else, I can go like that, right? And now I just need to reference it as such inside my JSX. I need to say not title.
Yeah, but this function we don't have to write it. If we just, I mean the const, we don't have to write it. We just put it into the.
Yeah, we could do all of this inside
Inside that.
this right here. So I can just grab this and put that in there. Yeah, there we go.
So which is the best way? The equals props or passing parameters?
You know, I prefer kind of doing it this way, but also once you have a whole bunch of props in there, it gets a little bit long. So it's really kind of up to you stylistically. And if you were working on a team, they would probably have certain specs on sort of how they wanted that to look. Yeah. So just kind of be flexible with it. Know how it works and how to apply it. That's all. Yeah. All right. So let's go back and quickly review what we did in that other destructuring file. Where did it go? Oh, I almost lost it. Okay, cool. So let's quickly read through this. Prativa, what's happening here from 1 to 13? Did you miss that? Is that what you said?
Oh, yeah,
Easy.
yeah.
Well, that's okay. You still know what's going on, right?
We are creating an object and we are doing the key value here.
Mm-hmm.
We are creating the object classes and the key are first, last, email, hair color, and interest.
Good.
All the rest of the keys have the string, but the interest has the value array.
Correct. Yes, the value of this interest key is an array that has a bunch of strings inside it, right? Good. All right. Now over here, this is where it starts getting interesting. Who wants to read 15 to 21? Any volunteers? Max does, yeah.
So we have the constant
Love it.
there. This is the interests. We're getting into that array list, and we're just printing out the first and second interests, and then the all of
Oh, are we printing anything here?
Oh no.
I think not. All right.
Oh.
So what's happening is it kind of looks like we're creating something, right? Because we're saying const. But what is actually being created here? What variables have we created in this destructuring?
Three.
Yeah, what are they?
First interest,
Good.
second interest, and all of the interest.
Exactly.
First interest is holding the first interest, and
Mhm.
second interest is holding the second.
Holding the value of the second one.
Yeah, in the second one, and all of the interest are holding the rest of the values.
So it's created that new array for us that has 3 elements inside of it. Yeah, very good. All right, there we were just console logging. Let's look back at here real quick. Pretend like we still have this. Line 25, Geo, what's going on here from 25 to 30?
We have const and first has a value of not first.
So what does that mean when I use this colon like that?
Just you can change the name from first to whatever name you want.
Okay, did that actually change the name of the key inside my object though? No, it didn't, right? So what we call that is aliasing. In other words, instead of me creating a variable called first, I've now created a variable called not first, but the value of it is still whatever the value of first was inside the object, right? Good. All right? And then what's happening here on 28 and 29?
And then hair color is the default.
Okay.
And shoes is takes in a alias.
Okay, yeah, so we're aliasing shoes, and we're saying we want to call this not shoes, right?
And it's a default.
Okay. So we have a default. So what's that default for again? Why do I want that? Or why? In what situation might that come in handy?
Well, we don't have anything in the object. We don't have that value.
Yeah. So if we're a little unsure of whether this key exists inside the object, we can give it a default value just in case. Okay. Good. And then over here on lines 32 through 35, Francis. Since it's you, you can go ahead and explain what's happening there.
Well, just like the other stuff that we just talked about, we have a const, and then first is basically just we're basically doing a spread. So we have the first, which is the first value, which is the first name, and then
Okay.
just the rest of whatever's up in the object.
Yeah, so right now we have two variables which actually hold the same value, right? We have this variable called not first, and we also have a variable called first.
Right.
Yeah, and then our rest object, as you mentioned, is going to look a lot like your normal object, only without that first key in it. Yeah, everything but that. Yes,
So
Alvin.
up to this point, we've been calling destructuring in terms of value, or we're destructuring the value based on the key. Is there a way to call the key name instead?
I'm a little unsure of what you're asking. What do you mean instead?
So
I mean, because here we are using the key name, right? We're actually using.
I guess it's not destruction related, but just calling the key, like all the existing keys inside an object.
Could we like loop through them? Is that what you're asking?
Not looping through. Well, I mean looping through the console log or print on or render on a page.
Oh, well here's a way that we can see all the keys inside of an object. You can just call this function. So let's console.log object.keys, and then you can just pass in whatever object you want to see all the keys for. It will create an array out of all the keys.
Okay. And then after that you can call.
Okay, so if I go Francis like that, let's see what we have. See, we've got this array that has first, last, email, hair color, and interests in it. So that's a quick way to get all the keys inside of an object, and it turns them into an array for you.
So basically, doing the spread is just kind of filtering out whatever else is not, I guess, defined there. Or
The spread, yeah, the spread is sort of like, okay, well, give me everything else besides anything that I've already set aside.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that would be a good use if you're like filtering or anything like that.
Yeah, or if we wanted, like I said, if we wanted to just sort of extract everything from an object but a couple keys or something, that would be an easy way to do it.
Okay.
So very easily I was able to exclude that first key, right, and just be left with everything else left over. Yeah.
So we are using Mongodb header, right?
Yeah, that wasn't related though. That was kind of on another note, yes, we will be using MongoDB.
I think that will come handy. This concept will come handy here.
Trying to think when we would use this for MongoDB specifically.
MongoDB is going to have so many nested objects, right?
It could. It just it really depends on how you've structured it. So the more nesting that you have inside there, the more I would argue, well, maybe it's time to do some kind of a SQL database. You know,
SQL is better for nesting.
if we have something that has a ton of different relationships in it, so things are connected to one another and that sort of thing, I would argue probably a SQL type database is better for you anyway.
And React can work with something such as MySQL as well.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah. In fact, React can work with any kind of backend that you want. As long as your backend can serve up some data to it, good to go. Yeah, so it's super flexible like that.
Question, so like instead of France 40 line 42, you can put the rest there. It's gonna work. So object keys rest.
Oh, yeah, that would work as well. Because remember, rest was an object that had everything except for first inside of it. Yeah. So now we're seeing last, email, hair color,
okay.
interests. Yeah. Good. Cool. All right. I think we're pretty good there. Let me have thumbs and make sure everyone feels pretty good about this. Whoa, all of a sudden, yeah, now I'm confident. You gave me the confidence.
What?